Okay, and we are live. Let me get my screen up. All right. Welcome everyone to the BeInCrypto weekly live stream. I'm your host David Borman, and I'm here with our guest today is the Moon, which you might know from Twitter and YouTube. And we'll be discussing current situation in the Bitcoin market, how it's being affected by the current financial situation globally. We'll also probably be touching on recent YouTube censorship that's been happening towards certain cryptocurrency channels. As always, don't take any of this as investment advice. It's just a bunch of people talking about cryptocurrency and markets. So with that, we'll start with you, Carl. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll go around and have everyone introduce themselves?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me here on this live stream. So for anyone who doesn't know who I am, I make YouTube videos. I make one video every day about Bitcoin. And it's a 10 to 15 minute video where I talk about some technical analysis, look at the price action. But the biggest part of the video has to do with the news and fundamentals for Bitcoin, and also financial markets and what's happening in the macroeconomics. I focus a lot on the financial crisis that is happening now, and I've been warning about a potential financial crisis for some time now. And this is all of that kind of stuff is what I'm talking about on my channel. And I have a passion for Bitcoin and economics and monetary policies, and all of this just blends together very well. Twitter, I do basically the same thing.
Excellent. All right, Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Adam, and I'm the editor-in-chief of BeInCrypto, specifically the English language website. So I run the day-to-day news operations, among other things. I'm happy to have Carl on the show. Carl, we actually met in Malta in the spring, briefly, had a nice chat, so I'm glad to have you back on the show. That's cool. And yeah, that's it.
All right, Yop.
Hey guys, I'm the manager of the social media for all the languages that we have, and right now a big focus on the Telegram group. We have a trading course and trading signals there. So if you haven't checked it out, please, you're welcome to check it out. And I'm looking forward to discussing everything with you guys today. Really glad to have the Moon Carl here. And let me pass it on to Danny.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, Carl Moon. I'm Danny. I'm editor-in-chief of the Spanish team. Passionate already in crypto since 2017 early, and very glad that we have this time to share with everybody. Our site, the Spanish division, just specializes more in Latin America and Spain, but of course we cover all general news like anybody else. So very glad to be here with everybody.
All right, well, let's start off by just talking about kind of how we've been starting every week, Bitcoin and the market as a whole. Obviously, we're still dealing with this ongoing financial crisis. Traditional markets have seen some recovery, but most people aren't expecting it to last. Bitcoin's doing pretty good today. We were mentioning just before we went live about how it probably has to do with people getting their stimulus checks. So I guess I wanted to open up to a general discussion of the market, but also talking about do we think people are going to use their stimulus checks to buy cryptocurrencies? Do we think that's something that a lot of people are interested in, or do you think people are too scared and more focused on paying their rent and stuff? So I'll start with you, Carl, since you're the guest today. So.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that now that we're seeing an environment that we have never seen before, we're seeing the financial markets completely tumbling. We've seen the stock markets come down, and a lot of fear surrounding this virus. So there's a lot of many factors that are very unpredictable because we have never really seen this before. And this makes it even harder to predict Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is already hard to predict from the beginning. I think that so people are getting these handouts from the government, and that is in and of itself a very interesting topic. Whether people are actually going to use these handouts to buy Bitcoin, I'm not too sure, because like you said, people are now fearful. Many have lost their jobs. I think maybe 70% of people in the US is living paycheck to paycheck already. and that was before the crisis. Now, when people lose their paycheck, then they have more troubles, more issues to take care of rather than speculating on Bitcoin. I hope that people do use their free handouts from the governments to buy hard assets like Bitcoin, gold, silver, or assets that can maintain its value, and maybe even have some kind of dividends, because saving these handouts is literally the worst scenario, because obviously the more they print, the more these handouts will be devalued over time, and this $1,200 that the Americans are getting now will be worth basically maybe a couple of dollars in a few years if this keeps on going. We've seen Venezuela, Zimbabwe, the Weimar Republic end up in the same kind of hyperinflation scenario that I think the dollar could end up in if we do see this continue. And I've been talking about this on my channel for a long time, that I think it's inevitable that the dollar eventually collapses, because this is a slippery slope. And when they cut the ties from the gold back in 1971, that was basically the end of the dollar. That was when the dollar and all other currencies went on a fiat standard. And ever since, we've seen debt levels just rise to extraordinary levels. And the past decade, everything has just escalated since the financial crisis. And I think that we are in so much trouble now. And now we are seeing people, the normal people, like the average people, are losing their jobs. And I think that, of course, Corona is a big part of it, but it's not the whole story. It's just the little pin to pop the bubble. Of course, it's a very large pin. It's more like a bazooka, is what I usually say. It's like it's a big problem in and of itself, but the fundamentals were way off before Corona came. We saw problems in the repo markets way before Corona ended up here. The debt levels were high before Corona. It's just an extraordinary environment when we see these two things happen at the same time: massive financial and huge virus outbreak. And I've said that I think that Corona is basically Corona is like kicking someone who's already lying down, right? It's like, yeah, it's a very, very bad environment for many people right now. So yeah, I don't think that people are going to speculate on coin with their health, but I do believe that eventually, when we see corporations start to default in a bigger way, and when banks start to default, when people cannot withdraw money from their ATMs anymore, when this scenario plays out, which very well could happen, then I think that it will be, or the fundamentals of Bitcoin will become undeniable to people, where people realize that Bitcoin is something that, yeah, you don't have to trust anyone, and is something that will always be there. You don't have to be scared of someone's debt being defaulted, because I mean, when it comes to banks and all other fiat currencies, you're always dependent on someone else being able to be solvent. But with Bitcoin, you don't have that third party risk. And yeah, I'm very bullish for Bitcoin in a financial crisis scenario. It's just that in the initial stages of the crisis, I think people have bigger worries to think about than to speculate on Bitcoin.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
I agree with everything Carl just said. I think, first of all, I think these checks, are really, I mean, people need them, of course, and I don't want to downplay that at all. There are lots of people that need these checks in order to pay their bills and put food on the table and that sort of thing. But I also think that in many ways, these checks are sort of just an appeasement while the United States government just pushes through another massive bailout package that is potentially even more egregious than we saw in 2008. So I think, like, in many ways it's a way to take people, like, here you go, we'll give the people this money, right, while the people behind the scenes and the big corporations and the banks and everything get these huge bailouts. What's interesting about it, I think, is I do think a lot of people are waking up more, because Bitcoin is known now. It's a mainstream thing. People know what it is, especially after 2017. Like, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't heard about Bitcoin. I think people are generally waking up to the idea that the money printer is really going, and that maybe their dollars aren't going to have the purchasing power they will in a year. So I think in some ways it does promote among certain individuals an interest in buying Bitcoin as sort of maybe a savings vehicle. And a really interesting point about it is not even just the dollar, but if the dollar is the global reserve currency, I was seeing on social media today, there's a lot of countries in, let's say, like Eastern Europe and elsewhere around the world where people work a full month just to get like half of one of these checks, what half of one of these $1,200 checks, right? So if the Federal Reserve is just running the money printer like that and devaluing the dollar as the global reserve currency, what does that say about all of the other weaker currencies?
That's a very good point. Yope or Danny, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was actually looking this morning at the Bitcoin pump, and I noticed that I don't really think it was the paychecks that caused the pump, to be honest, but I think it was the news that Trump wants to restart the economy again. Because what I noticed that when the European stock market opened up, they opened up with a huge gap to the upside. And at the same time, Bitcoin started to pump. So I think people have gained confidence in the market for now again, or investors at least, because of Trump, saying that he wants to restart the economy. But I also think that he's really underestimating what's going on in the US. I'm very surprised that he's saying these things, because I think the country that's doing the is in the biggest problems is right now the US actually, and I think that in the matter of a few weeks probably he'll has to shut everything down again, and that I believe that's when we'll see that the markets get hit again. um, so yeah, I think there's a small short-term optimism um, which will prove to be um, how do you say that, false. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And what I'm always curious about is the fact that like we've been printing a lot of money in the European Union and in the United States for the couple of years, and I'm a bit surprised that we haven't really seen inflation happening yet. um, do you guys have any thought about this, why it hasn't happened yet?
So think that now that we're seeing a deflationary event happening where we see stock markets come down, we see basically this default waves, that it's deflationary. And during this deflationary event, they are printing money, they're lowering interest rates. And if they didn't do this, I believe that we would see a much more dramatic sell-off, much dramatic deflationary event where this big
Mm,
bubble that was created would completely deflate. And who knows where that would take us? That could take us down to maybe 8,000, down below 10K, 5K, down to 3K. We've seen this happen before. Great Depression, for example, or the market crash that led to the Great Depression, Dow Jones lost approximately, I think, 90%. So a big
mhm,
deflationary event could easily see things like this happen. And now we're seeing not only stock market, seeing a massive real estate bubble globally, and we're seeing like many different bubbles simultaneously, which is also something that we haven't really before. So that's why they are reacting in this big way. They are printing money like never before, and we've seen low interest rates, and I think that they will probably lower. I think that the Federal Reserve will probably they will try negative interest rates. It's already been tried before in Sweden, for example, where I live, and in a handful of other countries. And what I think is that they will try to reinflate the bubble. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be successful again. They were able to do it back in 2008, to be fair, and most people expected them not to
mhm.
be able to do it, but they kicked the can down the road another 10 years or another 8 years, whatever, 12 years, and now we're sitting here with an even bigger problem than back then. But what I'm saying here is that I think that this inflation we should see or the pricing should see now is not really happening, but the inflation is happening. There's a difference between inflation and inflation. When they that is inflation, price inflation doesn't necessarily follow up much later. And inflation is basically when the prices rise. I think that now people are scared, are pulling out of this. They are not going to consume unnecessary consumption now. People are not going on TVs and buying unnecessary stuff that they were buying just like 1 year ago. And this is what they're trying to get going again, right, with these low interest rates and printing money. But what could happen is if they are successful in reinflating the bubble, get people to start consuming, then obviously all money, all of these currency getting printed will eventually fall all at once, maybe, when people stop careful. And we have seen a lot of getting printed, but I think even more. I think we might see the Federal Reserve balance sheet go maybe 30 trillion. And at that point, there is a big risk that inflation eventually really starts to, when everyone thinks that the danger zone, it seems like the stock market is recovering. When it seems like we're out of the woods, that's when I think this potential hyperinflation could, because this printing of this money, it doesn't go. It's something that they have set this in motion, and it's something that you just can't revert this. And yeah, we've seen this before. Like I said, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Weimar Republic, and I really think that this is a real threat, and the dollar will eventually be highly. And the bad part is that, of course, the dollar backs up all of the other fiat currencies. So if the dollar is in hyperinflation or high inflation, then we will see this also, of course, affect all currencies around the world. So this is a global crisis in every shape, way, and form.
Yeah, I really think
Yeah,
this
and
is
of course it's not.
unprecedented. Oh, you go ahead, Yup.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that of course it's not just the dollar that is printed into oblivion. I mean, we've seen quantitative easing happening in Europe as well, like on a very large scale. So I think it's most fiat currencies that will have this problem in the future. And I think I think it is a like a ticking time bomb. I also think it's like when you take it a step further, it's interesting to think about like if potentially Bitcoin would become like the first currency globally, like if you have hypothesized like that, um, like like wouldn't it be a problem that it's only 21 million Bitcoin? Because I think the gold standard also um, didn't really help with growing. Like I think like the fact that we could print money, maybe we did it too much right now, but I think it also really helped our economy to grow much faster. And I think we also have a lot of luxury because of this. So I'm not sure if like I think like if Bitcoin would be like the number one world currency, then we would have to have like a totally different economy, which is not focused on growth that much. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, just generally speaking, I think like the problem with having a gold standard, I think historically, is that gold is pretty illiquid. And it was actually extremely easy to manipulate the global markets for the people that had amassed the majority of the gold, right? Now, Bitcoin, of course, is not a Bitcoin is easier to transfer. I mean, a million times easier to transfer than gold, right? So I think the spendability aspect of Bitcoin is very good. But yeah, I mean, if we look at the current status today, there's you know there's large concentrations of Bitcoin in let's say a relatively few number of people. So the Bitcoin market is very easily manipulated, in my opinion. Just like the metals market as well. So yeah, I don't know if having Bitcoin, as the global currency of the world necessarily is good for economic growth. but it's certainly good, I think, for maintaining your purchasing power in the long term, or growing your purchasing power in the long term. Whatever the new paradigm is, if the dollar collapses and fiat currencies just collapse, there will have to be a new paradigm. And whether that is Bitcoin or that is something else, we can only speculate at this point. But I think people are searching for their safe havens at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's the power of Bitcoin is basically you don't depend on the decision of a president or some group of people, that they have the power to manipulate your money in that sense, the worth of it, and it's just the technology itself who decides that. Um, so I think that's the big power. That can be scary for some people, I think, but I think it's the way to go. But I have a question for Carl. We're speaking about hyperinflation, and because it's kind of Bitcoin with hyperinflation or inflation, it just the narrative works perfectly. But for example, I read an article of comparing an article being crypto comparing this actual crisis with the one of the 1920s, and basically it went up, and then after some years the markets went up, but after some years we had a long deflationary a trend for some time, so there's less purchase power for everybody and everything goes down. So my question is, Bitcoin works the narrative very well with a financial crisis, but we always speak about inflationary. But what if we had for, I don't know, 5 years deflationary financial crisis? Would Bitcoin then be valuable still for some people, or how do you see that, Carl?
Yes, I think Bitcoin would still be very valuable to people, and it is true that this could either resolve in a big hyperinflation. It could also resolve in a hyper deflation. One or the other will happen, and I think that the same is a would be an issue for gold here. But I think that in a deflation, nominally, we would see gold and Bitcoin go down in price. For example, Bitcoin might go down to $300. We might see gold go down to a couple $100. But in that scenario, we have to measure value against other things and not nominally, because if a Big Mac now costs 3 cents and Bitcoin is at $300, then we still have a bigger value increase against other things. So but yeah, I mean, I've heard people have the same make the same case for gold, where gold could go down to $700, $500, but still be a very, very good investment ROI wise, because basically you would lose much more money in everything else. And this is something that I think this is how I would see that. I mean, we could see a big deflation. This is what we are seeing. So if they are unsuccessful in re-inflating this bubble, then yes, we will see a huge deflationary crisis. But I don't see that as a problem, because the fundamentals of Bitcoin don't change ever. Bitcoin will be valuable because it's always the easiest way to send money all the around the world. It's extremely liquid. You have no borders. You have nothing stopping you. It's just the perfect way to transfer value for individuals, for countries, for corporations, and especially if we see this deflationary crisis. Because if banks default and if everyone starts having this default spiral, then I think liquidity will be a major issue. How do you move value around if the banking system is going bankrupt, and if these gateways that you used previously doesn't exist anymore, then as long as you have an internet connection, you can send Bitcoin anywhere. So honestly, I really don't see any problem for Bitcoin when it comes to the flaws of the current monetary system. I think that ironically, the value of Bitcoin doesn't really come from Bitcoin itself. Rather, it comes from the flaws of the current monetary system. Because if we could trust banks, if this banking system was a perfect system, then there would be no need for Bitcoin. Bitcoin would be useless, because why not just use a perfectly working system? But as we have seen for the past 100 years, and even more so the past decade, we are not living in a perfect system. We have anything but a perfect system. It's a fundamentally flawed system where it's a big Ponzi scheme. Basically, we see money being the same as credit. We see credit extend more and more. The debt levels are rising. So Bitcoin is the perfect alternative, and I think that, like I said previously, the fundamentals of Bitcoin will become undeniable to people when people have no choice anymore. I think Bitcoin is not going to grow based on speculation in the long run. It's going to grow based on utility. When your money is hyperinflating or hyperdeflating, if your money is not working anymore, you need an alternative. And I think Bitcoin will be this alternative. I think gold is also going to perform very well in the next few years. But personally, I am much more heavily weighted towards Bitcoin.
All right. On that note, I do want to bring up the fact that I hate to cut this a little short, but I know, Carl, you have to go soon. Also, my Zoom meeting is telling me that it's going to cut us off shortly because I guess I have to upgrade to Pro. I didn't have this problem last week on my other computer, but I will fix it. So I think we should just wrap it up here. I will fix these technical issues, and next week we'll be back with a full episode because I didn't expect this to happen. But I know, Carl, you do have to go in a moment. So if you have any final thoughts on the market or anything, I'd love to hear them right now.
Yeah, so the halving is coming up, and I think the halving is a very, very important event. And even though I don't think that the price will necessarily move a lot at the halving or even in the immediate few weeks after the halving, I think that price-wise it will be a non-event in the short term, but fundamentally it's a major thing, especially now in this financial crisis where we're seeing quantitative easing globally. It's not only the Fed, it is globally. The central banks are printing money out of nothing and buying not only government bonds now, they are also buying corporate debt. And we will probably very soon see central banks start buying stocks. And in this environment, the halving is going to give more attention to Bitcoin and the fact that Bitcoin is undergoing a quantitative hardening. It's the exact opposite, and this divergence is very, very interesting to me. And I think that it's a lifetime opportunity to buy Bitcoin in this environment and at these levels, because Bitcoin is quite oversold, in my opinion, on the weekly, monthly time frame.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here with us today. And I look forward to seeing the interview we have with you. And to all our audience, again, we'll be back next week with a full episode. And check out our Telegram trading community for more info on what's going on in the market and daily technical analysis. On that note, I'd like to say thank you to everybody and have a great day.
Ciao, guys.
Thank you very much,
See ya.
David.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.